Welcome to the Bible Exalted, presented by eBibleFellowship, the electronic Bible Fellowship. eBibleFellowship is an online Christian ministry teaching faithfully from the Bible, using the biblical method of comparing Scripture with Scripture to come to truth. We invite you to visit our website at eBibleFellowship.org, where you'll find hundreds of hours of studies. You can email us at info@ebiblefellowship.org or visit our YouTube channel. And now it's time to welcome in our four-man panel and begin our live broadcast of the Bible Exalted program.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to eBibleFellowship's The Bible Exalted program. I'm your host, Gary Daniels, and today we're seeking the Bible's answers to various topics in which the Bible has the final say in the matter. Joining us today are our beloved three-panel speakers, Bob Grandy, Chris McCann, and Carl von Haringa. Now, this is our 12th episode, so welcome again, radio listeners, folks watching on Zoom, YouTube, and other streaming platforms. Today's discussion is the earth is billions of years old versus the earth is 13,000 plus years old. Now, before we start, you'll definitely be able to watch us on our website, www.ebiblefellowship.org, by clicking the Zoom button, or by radio live from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. Eastern. I also want to mention that later on in the program, we're going to open up the phone lines to hear from you. We'd love to hear your perspective. The number to dial is 888-969-9883. That's 888-969-9883. You're going to hit *9 to get yourself in queue, and then *6 to unmute yourself. Once again, *9 to get into the queue, and then *6 to unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you, so please give us a call. If you have a question or a comment, we'll definitely take that in the chat. However, we do ask that you stay on topic. If there's a natural progression in our conversation and you'd like to discuss that matter, you're free to do so. Once again, today's topic is the earth is billions of years old versus the earth is 13,000 years plus old. And where do we go from there? And we'll start with you, Bob.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Yeah, I'd like to relate how my experience with this topic, everything that I had learned in growing up in public school and in college and had seen on TV all the way up to my late 30s, led me to believe that the earth was very old. And that is that there was a big bang and that happened millions and if not billions of years ago. I used to be a big fan of Carl Sagan back in the 1970s and 80s, I think. And I remember that he used to say that the earth was billions and billions of years old. It had an interesting accent. And then somehow I started listening to Christian broadcasting in 1992. And one of the programs was teaching about the lies of the Big Bang and evolution and old Earth. And I was extremely shocked to hear that the Earth was very young, just thousands of years old. In fact, it was commonly held in Christian circles that the Earth was created in 4004 BC based on a man named Bishop Ussher, who worked with the genealogies in Genesis chapters 5 and 11. But then I read Harold Camping's book, Adam When, and he also worked in the genealogies of Genesis 5 and 11. But he understood that the Hebrew phrase called Quarashem, it's Qarashem in the for the Hebrew, And that's translated to mean called his name. And that was a key to unlocking the calendar that God had hidden in the Bible. For example, we read in Genesis 5, verse 3, and Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image and called his name Seth. Notice that it says called his name Seth, or Quarashem Seth. And what this means is that Seth was a direct son of Adam. He was not a grandson or a great grandson or a future descendant of Adam. On the other hand, there are many verses in Genesis 5 and 11 that use this another pattern. It goes like this. Person A lived X years and begat B, person B. A lived after he begat B for Y years and begat sons and daughters. All the days of A were X plus Y years, and he died. And the word begat here means that B was not a direct son of A. B would have been a descendant of A many years later. B would actually be born in the year that A died. So for example, we read in Genesis 5, verses 12 to 14, and Canaan lived 70 years and begat Mahalaleel. And Canaan lived after he begat Mahalaleel 840 years and begat sons and daughters. All the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. So this means that at the age of 70, Canaan fathered or begat an unknown, unnamed person that would eventually be the ancestor of Mahalaleel, who would be born during the same year that Canaan died at the age of 910. So this key understanding of Genesis 5 and 11 enabled Mr. Camping to discover the biblical calendar of history, starting with the year that Adam was created, which was 11,013 BC, according to our Gregorian calendar. And this was the same year that God spoke this universe into existence without any pre-existing raw materials. Therefore, the earth is not billions of years old. It is only 13,037 years old as of 2025 AD, which is the year we're living in right now. So, yeah, it like I said, it really shocked me to learn this after all my life believing that the earth was billions of years old. So, I'll turn it over to anybody who wants to add on to that.
Yeah, well said, Bob, and thank you for sharing that.
I just wanted to add, just to kind of prove the Kerosem a bit, like why you can't assume begat, because that's basically what happens with the Usher timeline. Is every time it says begat, they assume that it's an immediate son in view, and God gives a few examples, such as in Matthew 1:2, it says Abraham begat Isaac, and in that case we know that that's an immediate son because we can see that Abraham and Isaac, the context shows us that they lived at the same time. However, when you go to Genesis, it says Arpachshad begat Selah. And so there it also uses begat. But upon further research, you find out that through the New Testament, when God's going through the genealogies, you find out that he actually inserts this person named Canaan, which isn't the same Canaan that Bob was referring to. And I can pull that up. But in other words, it's actually proving that that begat doesn't always mean immediate, because here there's an insertion of Canaan between Arpachshad and Selah. And so anytime you see begat, you can't make that assumption. You have to dig deeper to see if it's an immediate son or if it's some later descendant. And another good example is In the New Testament, Jesus was referred to as the son of David. Now, anyone reading that would understand, okay, that doesn't mean he's an immediate son. They understand that has to mean that he came from the lineage of David, because David didn't have an immediate son named Jesus. It came through his line. And so that also proves that God uses that type of language. Or a lot of times Abraham would be referred to as Father Abraham. That didn't mean that he was an immediate father to to um, to the Israelites. It just meant that they came from his lineage.
That's right, because they said Jesus said, "If Abraham were your father, then you would love me." So
Right.
there is that language. If I may say, Chris, to the average Christian who's hearing this program, they might start to get a little, I wouldn't say discouraged, but they might feel a bit overwhelmed. We're dealing with Hebrew words and very deep search of the scriptures. How do we set the table for someone when they're approaching the Bible, the responsibility it is of a believer to look into these things, to delight in these things, and to press on into this kind of category with humility and a desire to seek God's word?
Well, the first thing is, as far as the billions, or I remember it used to be taught that it was millions, and it made a pretty drastic shift from millions to billions, and that's not possible. It's well, first of all, uh, the the secular theories of origins, and that's what it is. They're saying today, if you Google it, they'll say that the Earth, the universe, is 4.5 billion years old. You know, it's pretty precise, right? Like they know, and so they're saying 4.5 billion years ago is when everything started. Okay, fine, except they have no idea how everything started. Because what does that mean? 4.5 billion years ago, and they're still working on that. Was it a big bang, or there? And it sounds so complex, and you need men with all kinds of degrees to explain. Talk about the Bible being complex. Well, based on dating methods of Earth's um, um, core or crust or whatever, they go into elaborate explanations for how they come to that figure, and yet to me it's very simple. Because their theory is like, when you build a house. And when you build a house, you first need a foundation. You have to have a solid foundation, and then you can build your house. Now, for the child of God, we have a solid foundation, which is the Bible. And God tells us, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Or God tells us in Hebrews 11, in verse 3, through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. Things which are seen is the world, the universe, the physical realm of existence we can see, and it was not made by things which appear. So the Bible tells us the answer. Our answer for beginnings, origins of all things is God. God, an eternal being. So you don't have to answer, well, where did he come from? He's always been. He's always been. How can that be? How's that possible? I have no idea. That's what makes him so incredible, so magnificent, so just Well, you know,
Mhm.
you can use all kinds of superlatives, but God is our answer. We trust, we believe God exists and has existed from all eternity past. And therefore, this eternal God, he spoke and he's given us a record of it in Genesis chapter 1. Let there be. And that's the power of the word of God, that he can simply speak and things come into existence from nothing. There was nothing in the physical realm, and God spoke it into existence, and now there's all kinds of things. And we see them, we experience them with our physical senses. But so we have, that's our foundation for truth, for a timeline, where we go from there, and then we can look at Genesis 5, Genesis 11, we and other biblical information to lay out that timeline, and it's all built upon a solid foundation of the person, the being of God, and he gives us that critical, you know, absolutely necessary first step of where everything came from. That's what the world lacks. The scientists, you know, the brilliant minds of the world, they go to work, and you know, unfortunately, men are very wise to do evil. You see, they got a problem. Their problem is they don't want there to be a God. They don't want, because if there is a God, then they're a creature, and he's the creator, and they're subject to him, and that's, the Bible is his law book, and in the Bible, it tells us you have to keep his commandments, and all have failed to do that. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And as a result, the wages of sin is death. So the sinful man has a real need to rid himself of God. And so again, he will put his mind to it, and that is why all the uh, you know, much of modern science and their explanations, which are so complex, and people think, well, you have to be a great mind, these great minds that have laid all these things out. Yeah, they're great minds to do evil. They're great minds to think of how to explain the unexplainable. How can we explain our existence? How can we explain the fact that there is this beautiful world so well seemingly designed from their perspective? And so they come up with these elaborate theories, evolution, and which is the most ridiculous thing imaginable. But it all has to start with a big bang in their scenario. But you see, they're fooling us. They fooled me as a kid. They fooled Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah, they fool a lot of people. They're fooling us because it's like a con man. It's like a con man. Don't pay too close attention to the con. And the con is that they pick up and they start and they run with it billions of years, and everything has uh, you know, developed and come forth since then. Hold it. You know, a simple man needs simple explanations. Where did the original stuff come from, whatever you want to call it? I don't care. But it had to be something physical. It had to be matter of some kind. Where did it come from? And that's what ruins their whole theory.
So
They have no answer.
right.
They literally have no answer. We're working on it. We're working on it. With so you know, we know, we all know some good construction guys, you know, and they build houses. Well, do you build the house without the foundation? And it that sums up the whole secular um, idea on origins. They've just said we'll take care of the foundation later. Right now, we want to explain to you where everything came from. But you can't do that. No, start at the beginning, please. Start with a actual foundation and then go forward.
Right.
But they're stuck at that point.
That's a very good point, Chris, and thanks for laying the foundation for the timeline. So, do you think that God has withheld a lot of this understanding from man in terms of when the scientists will check for these things? Part of it is their unbelief, but did God also hide himself not only from the secular world, but also the professed Christian until in the last days? So when people did try to search things, and for example, a scientist might discover proteins in the fossils of a dinosaur, which would really confound someone who would say it's billions of years old to have like blood vessels or tissue or protein. So they would kind of keep the lie going. But do you think God also hid himself from man, or do you think it's kind of a combination of both?
Oh yeah. Well, God has hidden himself, but then again, he's in plain view. Like Psalm 19 tells us, and this is the word of God. Psalm 19, verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. So the whole creation is testifying to its workmanship, that it is um, a work product, and you can see it through the design, just like we can see, on my screen, I see a pillow behind me with a design of a flower. And did that just happen? Did that just happen? Or did a mind go to work and make that pillow and shape it and fashion it and put the design on there so that we can see it and take it in, and how much more complex are creatures, and we see design in every creature. The Bible would say that they're without excuse, and this is one of the reasons that God is judging in this day of judgment. He's judging the scientific community and the educational system of men, because the scientists have usurped the authority of God, and they have substituted a teaching that has, overtaken much of the world. And so many people in the world, even so-called Christians, believe these big dates, despite what the Bible says. And the scientists are very much in that sense like false prophets. They're they're putting forth false date information. They're saying that um, the world is so many billions of years old, and it wasn't a god. It wasn't a god who made it. No, it just developed by random chance, and if you give so much time, that's one of the reasons why there has to be so much time, because people realize, we can look out into our yards, and we see the weeds, we see the thorns, the briars, and that's what develops. If I leave my yard alone for a long, long time, is it going to get better, or is it going to get increasingly worse? And the longer you leave it, it doesn't make it improve, it makes it deteriorate even more. And so, our own our own experiences disprove the whole idea. That's why it's so ridiculous.
You know, it really, and it also what you said about time, you know, they need a lot of time to kind of just hide the fact that things evolve, right? Because there's no way to really prove that something evolved. You know, you can't obviously if we saw it happen on a short time frame, then they could say, see, look, you know, a giraffe's neck is, you know, 3 feet longer or something, you know, or he's morphing into something else. But that's kind of it's very convenient for them to say billions of years because they can kind of hide that, you know, behind time. Well, we can't see it, but you know, over time it happened.
Yeah, there's no record in it. The fossils don't
Right.
show that there was evolution. There's no missing link that has shown up in the fossils, and the fossils are there because of the flood. You know, if something dies, it just decays. And if it, you know, if a dog dies on the street, it'll get eaten up, or it'll decay and won't be there. But because of the flood, we have evidence all over the world with the fossil record shows that there was a flood, and these fossils do not show that there was evolution. So I don't know how they get around that, but
To answer what Gary was saying too, it really shows that God has to reveal the truth because even, you know, you have the secular scientists, you have the professed Christian, and then you have the true Christian. And the only one that's correct is the true Christian because they're getting their information from the Bible correctly. But even when the professed Christian wants to try to find the age of the earth, they have that false timeline they follow. Bishop Ushers, the scientists have their false timeline, which is too much. So, you know, like what Gary said, I think God is hiding truth from them. He's not allowing them to see, you know, from studying the universe that the earth or universe is that long.
Well,
No matter,
one is better than the other, of course.
right, one's a little closer. It's a
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make. That Usher at least had the right idea, right? He was going to the Bible, and he was looking at the genealogies, so he was in the right place, right book, right
Mm.
chapters. Um, Only to give him his due, he was looking at a time when things were sealed up, and it wasn't God's program at that time. Usher lived 17th century. So it wasn't God's program to bring forth that information at that time. When we get into the 20th century, like I don't know exactly when Mr. Camp, maybe 1960s, 1970s, that well, the book came out, Adam When, early 1970s,
74.
74. And that was the time because we were approaching the end of the world. And it turns out that prior to Mr. Camping studying that and the Lord opening up his understanding, we wouldn't have known this, but it turns out 1988 was the 13,000th year of Earth's history. So in the 70s, you're getting pretty close, and the timeline of history, the biblical calendar, the Bible's own calendar, is key to practically everything God has done over this period of the Great Tribulation now into Judgment Day. We wouldn't know hardly anything if we didn't first know the time. And so the Lord um, gave him some advance information, opening up the calendar. So, and the key, like Carl was saying, and Bob was saying about Kerashem, the key to unlock the calendar, so the correct timeline of the Bible could kind of flow forth. And we know, by the way, we can prove from the Bible quickly that Usher's calendar is incorrect. It has errors. And for example, Usher says that Abraham was born 1996 BC. And from the biblical calendar, starting with a generally widely accepted date for Solomon, Solomon's death, 931, we can go back. He reigned 40 years, 971. In the fourth year of his reign, 967 BC, foundation of the temple was laid. 1 Kings 6, verses 1 and 2 tells us 480 years earlier from the laying of the foundation, they came out of Egypt. So the Exodus, you can, get a calculator, just 967 plus 480, 1447 BC from the Bible. That's the Bible's date for the Exodus. And we know Israel was 430 years to the self same day in Egypt. Add 430 to 1447, 1887 BC, or is that right?
1877.
1877 BC was when Jacob stood before Pharaoh, and he had his name changed to Israel. So that's Israel, and the children of Jacob were the children of Israel entering into Egypt to begin that 430 years. And Pharaoh just happened to ask him, "How old are you?" And Jacob told him, "I'm 130. So we know from 1877 at 130, Jacob and Esau, the twins, were born 2007 BC. They were born when Isaac was 60. Therefore, Isaac was born 2067 BC. And we know Abraham was 100. When Isaac was born, Abraham was born according to the Bible, biblical information, 2167 BC. Usher says he was born 1996 BC, which is an error of 171 years. And
That's amazing. I never thought to work backwards from Solomon to arrive at Abraham.
Well, yeah, it's a quick, and when we go the other way, and actually from Abraham was born when his father Terah was 130. So we know Terah was born 2297 BC. That's almost 2300 years BC. And Usher's telling us Adam was created 4004 BC. From Abraham, or from Terah 2297, to Adam is a little over 1700 years, according to that erroneous calendar. So you have to believe that in 4004, God made man, Adam, and it's 4004. Well, then just, presupposing, saying, all right, this is according to that calendar. And this is important because so many Bibles have that calendar. They give notes concerning dates based on Usher's calendar. And so those Bibles are wrong, but in that notation. But you have 1700 years basically from Adam, and then we know Adam lived 930 years. So from 4004, Adam's almost coming down to the year 3000, about 100, 70 some years, 80 years short. You have Adam dying like right around the time that secular history archaeologists have shown the Egyptian empire, some of the earlier dynasties, they date back to 3000, 3100 or so BC. And that's when Usher's saying that Adam died. Well, after Adam, then you have several patriarchs until you get to Noah, and then Noah lived 600 years until the flood. So I haven't had a chance to work that out according to Usher's calendar. I'm just trying to illustrate how off it is that if you're coming down from Adam, and then you have to go 7 generations to Noah from 4004, and yet from Abraham to Terah, we know we can go all the way back 2300 years. Are you trying to say the flood took place? Adam lived his whole life. The flood took place after 7 patriarchs. which destroyed the whole earth. Then the world was built back up again to the point of the Tower of Babel, when there, seems like there was quite a number of people that were working on the Tower of Babel. So you had to have a population growth. And then God confounded their language. And then the days of Peleg, when God divided the continents. All that's taken place in a space of 1700 years. That would be like from Christ to the year 1700 AD.
And,
Well,
and
yeah,
Chris, if I may pause you all there, just a reminder for folks that are listening, welcome to the Bible Exalted program. Today's topic is the earth is billions of years old versus the earth is 13,000 plus years old. We want to hear from you. We're going to open up the phone lines. And if you have a comment or a question to ask, we can go from there. And I just want to briefly just make a statement. Chris, could you explain what is Bishop Usher doing wrong? What is his analysis to come up with this wrong understanding? We can see the offset, but what is he doing biblically that's incorrect?
I think Carl has a good grasp of that. Carl, you
Okay.
want to explain that?
yeah, it basically starts off with not understanding what we went over earlier, begat, or taking begat on the surface level. So anytime he saw begat, he just assumed that had to be an immediate son. But we've shown examples where begat doesn't always mean immediate. And so that means that, like Mr. Camping pointed out in his book, that begat's not very helpful because it could mean both. You have the example of Abraham and Isaac, where God uses begat. We know, we can prove that they lived at the same time. But then God also gave an example of a king named Joram, which begat, it said Ozias begat Joram. Well, when you go through the kings, you realize, oh, that's not an immediate son. That was like his great grandson. So it's four kings later. And so I think maybe when you're laying out a genealogy, to lay it all out, you don't necessarily include every single son, because you could have like a really long list. So perhaps one of the reasons they did that was maybe for a shorter list. I'm not sure, but
Well, I'll read this, Carl, and then you can explain. It's from Genesis 5. Let's say verse 12. Uh, and Canaan lived 70 years and begat Mahalaleel. And Canaan lived after he begat Mahalaleel 840 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. So, looking at that, what's Usher's error? What's the key that Mr. Camping learned to unlock the true calendar? And because a lot of listeners are probably like me, you got to see it from the Bible. So can you look at that passage and explain that?
yeah. So the key there is that called his name isn't used, and he discovered that kerasim, which is actually rarely used with patriarchs. It's only used a few times, whereas with most of the patriarchs, you don't find that phrase kerasim or called his name. And so with the case with Enos and Canaan, that's the first example where called his name isn't used. So it was used with Adam and Seth. It was used with Seth to Enos. But as soon as you get to Enos to Canaan, we don't find kerasim used. And so that was the key to letting us know, okay, something's different here. Something isn't the same. And so this Mr. Camping understood that kerasim was used to prove an immediate son, because when you had a parent name their child, it was immediate. You don't have like a grandfather, a great grandfather giving a name. And so it makes sense why called his name was used, because Adam was
If,
the immediate son to Seth, and so he's calling his name Seth.
right.
Whereas with
And
Enos and Canaan, Enos isn't calling Canaan
Right.
his name Canaan. It's a further descendant.
so Chris and Carl and Bob, from what I can understand, if it's not a direct father-son link and the word begat is used, we're not to assume that it's a direct father-son link.
Yeah.
However, if a calendar patriarch, let's say it's Enos, in order for the calendar to switch to the next person, is it always has to be where the next lineage, the person has to be born the year of the transition?
That's the thing.
Or does it have to be a birth? Or can they just say, okay, there's two men here, we're just going to switch to you?
Hey, Bob, you want to do your X and B and Y and X that you did earlier, but this time use Genesis 5, looking at the verses in verse 12.
Well, yeah, in Genesis 5 verses 12 to 14, it says, and Canaan lived 70 years and begat Mahalaleel. And Canaan lived after he begat. Now that's the begat means it was not a direct son. And Canaan lived after he begat Mahalaleel 840 years and begat sons and daughters. All the days of Canaan were 910 years. So that 910 is the sum of 70 when Mahalaleel was begat, plus
Was
the
Mahalaleel born at that time?
no, Mahalaleel was born when Canaan died. It's all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. And this is what when he died, that's when Mahalaleel was born in the same year. It doesn't necessarily mean on the same day, but in the same year, so that the calendar that God is keeping goes from that's why we call them calendar reference patriarchs, because it goes from Canaan to Mahalaleel. They were not direct father son,
So
but
it's end to end,
yeah,
right?
it's end to end. Yeah, and so that's the error that
Right.
Usher had, was that he thought that Mahalaleel was a direct son of Canaan, so it shrunk. It's
Right.
it shrunk the
There it is.
calendar,
Yeah.
Right.
from
It's because it's
we
overlapping. All the
So
patriarchs are
Well,
overlapping.
well, let me just say this. That when because of misunderstanding the begat, Canaan lived 7 years and begat Mahalaleel. Usher is thinking that Mahalaleel is born when Canaan's 70.
70 instead of
And
8
and in
890.
actuality, it's at the end of
910.
Canaan's life of 910
Right.
that Mahalaleel is born. So you can see the discrepancy between 70 and 910, which is why Usher has a shorter time span from 4004, to present day, 6,000 some years. Whereas the true biblical calendar has a longer time span. In this one case, there's a difference of 800 and some
20
years.
years. Yep.
so
20.
so
In
Chris,
that one, and so the true biblical calendar is over 13,000 years, more than double Usher's calendar's timeline.
It's actually
so
almost
Chris,
about 7,000 years
right.
long.
So Chris, Carl, and Bob, when that formula was given, the word begat is used, and it kind of throws off the reader, because if Canaan lived 70 years and begat, on face value, how did God open up the eyes of Mr. Camping to recognize that when he begat, it wasn't Mahalalel, it was just a patriarch, not even a patriarch, but just a son who eventually had sons, who eventually had a son the year Mahalalel was born, Canaan died, if that makes sense.
Well, we have a
How did
good
they
example.
understand that word begat? Thank you, Carl, that it represents someone who he just had a son. It wasn't the direct father son linked to Mahalalel. It was just a son who eventually had a son, or a son and a son and a son. And then Mahalalel was born the day Canaan died.
I believe he was working on this for 5 years before it opened up,
Mhm.
and he published the book Adam When. It didn't come easy. I'm sure that he had to spend hours upon hours studying the Bible to make sure that everything that there was no contradictions, and and because the numbers don't lie, and That I believe that's how he came up. Well, of course, God had to open his eyes as he studied the scriptures and compared spiritual things with spiritual things. And but yeah, I believe I heard him say or read it somewhere that he worked on this for like 5 years.
Wow.
Well, there's a good example that basically we can prove, besides the one I mentioned with Abraham and Isaac. This is just a patriarch that was born around the same time. I mean, that's closer to Adam, and that's Arphaxad. It says in Genesis 10:24, it says Arphaxad begat Selah. So if you just look at that on the surface value, like all the other patriarchs, again, you would just assume it's immediate son. But in this case, it's kind of interesting because if you go to the New Testament and you go to, I think it's Matthew chapter 1. Let's see. Matthew 1 verses so this is a genealogy where God is working backwards.
Um,
Um
Matthew 1 would be from Abraham.
Maybe it's Matthew 2.
Luke,
No.
Luke,
Luke
3.
Sorry, Luke 3. That's it. So if you go to Luke 3, yeah, I believe this is it. Yeah, so in Luke 3, if you read, I'll start with verse Luke 3:35. So God is giving a genealogy that's working backwards from Jesus all the way to Adam. And when you get to verse 35, it says, and these are Greek words which have a Hebrew equivalent. So it says, which was the son of Saruk, which would be Serug, which was the son of Ragau, which would be Ru, which was the son of Phalek, that would be Peleg, which was the son of Heber, that would be Eber, which was the son of Selah, which was the son of Canaan, which was the son of Arphaxad. So here it goes from Selah to Canaan to Arphaxad. Whereas in Genesis, it goes from, of course, this is working backwards, but it goes from Arphaxad directly to Selah. So we read that in Genesis 10, Arphaxad begat Selah. But here we see it goes Arphaxad, Canaan, Selah. And
And
so
what does that mean?
God's inserting this mysterious Canaan that wasn't present in Genesis. And so he's letting us know that there's actually a son born in between Arphaxad and Selah, which is proving that back in Genesis 10, that that word begat is it's not immediate son. Selah is not an immediate son. And Mr. Camping thought, out of all the patriarchs, why is God highlighting this particular one and mentioning Canaan? And he believes it's because if you go back to Enos, the Canaan that was begotten of Enos, God's highlighting, be careful, don't assume that this Canaan is an immediate son to Enos. And
So
so,
in other words, Bishop Usher wasn't being very careful.
exactly.
Which gets back to what Gary was saying. His eyes, the Lord was hiding truth. He sealed that up. It wasn't the time, like so many things for the church age, but at the time of the end, and we can't miss. 1974 is just a few years before 1988, and this calendar worked out the history of the world to show that 1988 was the 13,000th year of Earth's history. You guys probably have heard, we might have talked about this before, that phobia that people in the world have. They call it
Triskaidekaphobia.
triskaidekaphobia. It's two different ways of pronouncing this. This is the more common way. Tris is 3. Chi is the Greek word for end. Dec is 10. 3 and 10 phobia.
Wow.
Number 13. Fear, phobia is fear, fear of the number 13. And a whole lot of people have it. They're afraid of Friday the 13th. They're afraid of sitting when getting on a plane in aisle 13, in seat number 13. There is some hotels do not have a floor 13. It's very, common, widely spread fear. Why? Why? They don't have a fear of the number 12, number 14, the number 13. And, this is just a minor thing. We're not trying, I wouldn't try to prove anything by that. But it's a well-founded fear, actually. According to the Bible, the history of the world will complete and finish after 13,000 years. And God tells us in Deuteronomy 13, no, Deuteronomy 32, I think. Deuteronomy 32, it says in verse 8, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. God set the bounds of the people, and it mentions inheritance of the nations, sons of Adam. That's mankind, who are the sons of Adam, and the number of the children of Israel would have to be the tribes. You couldn't know like the number, say, 1,000,000, 5,000,000, but we do know the number of their tribes. Well, you might think 12, but actually 13. There's 13 tribes because God gave Joseph two, Manasseh and Ephraim. And so the timeline for the sons of Adam, mankind, is established according to the number of the children of Israel, 13 tribes, and then will come the end of man's inheritance of the earth. His temporal inheritance of living in this world will be over, and that's where we've entered into. And just think, if we look back of the massive changes that have come upon the church, come upon the whole world since right around that time, right around 1988, the explosion of iniquity, the apostasy of all churches, it really fits. It matches very well.
It's amazing that you mentioned the 12 tribes and actually 13. I think Jacob had 12, but also 13. And also the disciples were 12, 13. Is that a possible pattern that God gives?
The apostles, there were 12 apostles, but then the apostle Paul insists that he was an apostle. And he was, because he saw the Lord, and that would be one of the qualifiers. And so he would have been the 13th apostle. So yeah, 12 apostles, but 13.
And
And when we look at biblical history according to the true calendar, the Bible's own calendar, with the proper key that lays out the history of the world, we see that Old Testament history up until the birth of Christ in 7 BC, it was 11,006 years, and then Christ would go to the cross and bind Satan, and the Bible tells us Satan was bound for 1,000 years in the book of Revelation. He's bound for 1,000 years. Well, that's figurative 1,000-year period. But if you put it together, 11,000 years of Old Testament history, Christ comes, binds Satan for 1,000, and upon the loosing of Satan, you come to the end of the world. And that's the time we're in. He has been loosed. So according to that figuring, 11,000 plus 1,000 years of binding should be 12,000 years of history. 12,000 is the number of fullness. But no, it wasn't a literal 1,000 years he was bound. He was bound over the course of the church age, 1,955 years, and it turns out he's loosed after 13,000 years. So we see the same interesting relationship between 12 and 13. 12 tribes, actually 13. 12 apostles, actually 13. Should be 12,000 years of Earth's history, actually 13,000 years of Earth's history. So as 12 is fullness, 13 is super fullness, and the number that identifies with the end of the world.
It's
Right.
interesting is
And
God.
if I just make, please forgive me, Carl. I'm going to pause you there because we're going to need to say goodbye for our radio listeners. However, our program will continue on YouTube, social platforms, or on Zoom by going on www.ebiblefellowship.org. You can click the join Zoom button. You can continue on into this program. This is a lot of information, and hopefully, listeners, if you are being delighted by this revelation of understanding, some of you might be listening and enjoying this program. We'd like to hear from you, whatever your position. But we would ask that you continue to check out our programs by going on to www.ebiblefellowship.org for the Bible Exalted program. But yes, Carl, go ahead. You have about 30 seconds.
Well, I'll wait till the break,
Okay.
and then I'll
All
come
right,
back.
folks. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this segment of the Bible Exalted program, presented by eBible Fellowship, the electronic Bible fellowship. Visit our website at eBibleFellowship.org or our YouTube channel. You can also reach us by email at info@eBibleFellowship.org. And until our next Bible Exalted program, may the Lord's perfect will be done.
Welcome back, folks, to the Bible Exalted program. This is our bonus half an hour. Thank you for joining us. Today's topic is the earth is billions of years old versus the earth is 13,000 plus years old. Joining us today are our beloved three panel speakers, Bob Grandy, Chris McCann, and Carl von Heringa. Carl, you wanted to share something. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to point out, one interesting thing you find when you first pick up the Bible, anyone who's not familiar with the Bible, is how often numbers are mentioned. Like even just in Genesis, with the first few verses, God's already keeping track of time. This was day one, this is day two. So already you have numbers in view, and numbers are just everywhere in the Bible. I mean, there's a whole book called Numbers. But numbers are used everywhere in the Bible, and you notice that what's interesting is God does use prime numbers a lot, like 3, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 23. Those are all prime numbers, and those all carry very significant meanings. And not just to say not to say he only uses prime numbers, because the number 8 has significance, and that's not a prime number. But one interesting thing that maybe people don't also hear about is something called a twin prime, and that's like when you have two primes right next to each other, except there's a gap. And 11 and 13 would be a twin prime because 11, 12 isn't prime and 13 is. So I just thought that was interesting how God really highlights the 11,000th era and the 13,000th. Another example would be 17 and 19. They're twin primes right next to each other. But it's just, if you read the Bible, you just find numbers everywhere. And this is how, we're able to put the timeline together.
It's pretty interesting. This is our 12th episode, and we're talking about the number 13.
Right.
Not that there's any
God,
correlation to that.
God gave us, speaking about the number 13, God gave us a historical parable. This means it's true history recorded in the Bible. And it's a parable in that it hides truth. And this is in Joshua 6, where the Israelites circled the city of Jericho one time for 6 days. So they went around 6 times. And that relates to the year of creation in 11,013 BC to when the flood of Noah's day occurred in 4990 BC. It was 6,023 years after creation. So you have the 6,000 years plus a 23-year tribulation period relating to the 6 times that the Israelites circled Jericho. So that was the first earth. And then we read in 2 Peter 3 that the second earth came out of the water starting in a year after the flood. And then on the seventh day, so they circled Jericho one time each day for 6 days, and then on the seventh day they circled Jericho 7 times. So that brought the total up to 13. They circled Jericho 13 times. So the seven times they went around on the seventh day is equivalent to 7,000 years, which brings us up to the year 1988 AD, which was the 13,000th year of Earth's history, like Chris was saying. So yeah, God was hiding that information for us and revealed it to us at the time of the end, like it says in Daniel 12, that these words are sealed up until the time of the end. And like Chris was saying, Bishop Ussher, he lived in the 17th century. It wasn't time for the all of this information about the end of the world to come out. It was God's perfect timing to reveal it to Mr. Camp. Got to give Mr. Camping a lot of credit. He was the first one to come up with the biblical calendar of history by the grace of God. And so that's where we're at.
Yeah.
Let me read those verses, Bob. Joshua 6, verse 4, and 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the Hebrew word translated ram's horns is jubilee or jubilees. And the 7th day shall compass the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow with the trumpets. And shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, jubilee, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up every man straight before him. So you see, they're blowing trumpets, shouting with a great shout, and just compare 1 Thessalonians 4 with the coming of Christ. It says in verse 16, for the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God, and so forth. So the shouting, the trumpets are blowing, and like you said, God had them march around the city, the whole army, carrying the ark, once a day, 6 days. So at the end of 6 days, they'd gone around 6 times. On the 7th day, they went around 7 times the same day. So that's God who commanded them to do it that way. And God, yeah, you have 13 total times, but he broke it up. 6 was done differently than the 7. 7 all in one day. And that's what Bob was saying in 2 Peter 3, where the Bible mentions 2 earths. It speaks of the first earth destroyed by the flood, and the second earth, which is now, it says, which will be destroyed by fire, or, at the end of time, the last day, everything will burn. And then when you look from creation, which we can pinpoint, I don't think we mentioned it yet. The creation date, according to the Bible, is 11,013 BC. God creates the world, as Genesis recounts. Adam is formed, and then you can start counting from creation date to the flood, and we can know precisely. We're not guessing, because it's from the Bible. The Bible's truth. From creation to the flood, 6,023 years exactly. Why 23? 23 in the Bible is a tribulation number. So we see God went 6,000 years, like the army marched around Jericho 6 times. Then from the flood in 4990, I'll just make a little detour. from the flood in 4990 to the cross in 33 AD, how long is that? 4990 plus 33, 5,023 calendar years. Well, from creation to the flood was 6,023. And now to another major, incredibly huge event, Christ on the cross, 5,023. Fullness of thousands of years, 23-year, like a tribulation period. Well, going back to the flood day, 4990, then go, because they went around 7 times after 6, then go 7,000 years. And from the flood, we're actually directed in the Genesis account, Genesis 7, verse 4. God told Noah, yet 7 days. 2 Peter 3 just so happens to say 1 day is as 1,000 years in the context of discussing the flood and the end of the world right in the middle. 1 day is 1,000 years. So the 7-day reference to Noah goes 7,000 years from the flood, and it takes you to 2011. And the underlying Hebrew calendar date for May 21, 2011 is the 17th day of the second month, the very day the flood began. But anyway, there's your 7 times round, and it lands on May 21, 2011. And May 21, 2011 is the 13,000th, 23rd year from creation. However, if we can back up to the flood once again, and from the flood to 2033 is 7,023 calendar years, matching those other key biblical dates where something big happens. Is the biggest thing ever, except for the creation, when God destroyed the world with a flood at that time. It was, of course, the biggest thing ever when Christ came into the world and went to the cross to show forth what he had done at the foundation of the world. And it's the biggest thing ever for all mankind for God to finally do what he has said he would do, which is to bring total and utter destruction to the whole world. And that's what we're looking towards at this point in the year 2033, the end of all things. And what happened to Jericho? 6 times around, then the 7th day, 7 times around. After 13 times around, what happened to Jericho? The walls fell down. Joshua, and by the way, the name Jesus is basically the name Joshua. Joshua is the Hebrew. Jesus would be the Greek form. And so Joshua and the army of Israel went into the city Jericho and killed every man, woman, and child. Total destruction for Jericho, except for a harlot and her house and all within that house, Rahab the harlot, because she received the spies with peace, which was really language indicating she received Christ, the gospel, and she received the scarlet thread on her window protecting her. Her house was on the wall, so her house didn't fall. So everything you can picture, I don't know how God would have done that. How does God do so many things? But here's this enormous wall around the city. After 13 times, and they shout and the trumpets blow, the whole wall collapses, but there's this one thin little, sometimes you go through, say, a block in Philadelphia, West Philly or something, and you see all the houses have been demolished, but there's one house just standing. And on either side, it used to be row homes. They're all gone. Just that one house. Well, that would have been Rahab the harlot's house standing, and she lived, and everyone within her house lived. And that's what God has done with his salvation. We're not covered by a scarlet thread. We're covered by the blood of Christ. It's the same imagery really is the Passover blood, the blood of the lamb, protecting the Israelites' house when the destroyer came through Egypt.
We consider that a luxury, Chris, when there's no neighbors beside you. And we consider that a luxury when you don't have your road, even though it has a
Well,
negative connotation. That's a luxury.
I live on a row, but I'm at the end of the row, so I have partial
50%.
Yep.
But so Chris, I've been listening to the timeline for quite some time, and there are some good studies like on housetops. Someone actually says get a pen and paper, and you can kind of do the work yourself. You know, there's a good study done by John McCann that I have my son listen to and children, and with a piece of pencil and a paper, they can do the numbering themselves. But this didn't come easy. There's been a lot of correction by the Word of God, and I'm not sure if any of you gentlemen would like to talk about how, you know, it's painstaking. We touched on it before. It's so smooth and effortless now, but I'm sure there's lots of hours of prayer, patience, and waiting on the Lord for these answers. It looks like we have someone who has raised their hand. About a hope, please go ahead with your question or comment.
Good morning, and thank you. It's an effort to stay up. I mean, to follow this program, but it's very.
Excuse me a second, just to let everyone know our schedule going forward. Next 2 weeks we're going to be off. Then October 28th, 3 weeks from today, we'll have our last 7 a.m. Bible Exalted. The first Tuesday in November, we're going back to, was it 2 or 3 p.m.? We're going back to the afternoon. We'll let
I
you
think
know.
it was two.
2?
2 to 3 and then a half an hour.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so these early morning, I'm with you. These early mornings, they're not easy.
Okay, so it will be on the same channel, the Philadelphia
Yeah,
station.
everything. As far as the radio, we because we haven't gotten any calls, you know, from Philadelphia listeners for this program, uh, we're thinking it would be just as efficient to do a replay there. So we're going to have replays on the Philadelphia 7 a.m. broadcast. The broadcast will continue. It'll be a replay. And we'll do live in the afternoon.
Tuesday afternoon, right?
Tuesday afternoon, not on the radio. Not
And
on the
what
radio.
would
It'll just be our
what would be
normal Zoom, you know, YouTube, Facebook.
Oh, it
and
won't
what
be on
would,
the radio. It won't be on the radio.
No, not live. Not live.
Oh,
Because
okay.
we're locked into 7 a.m.
Okay.
till I think next April or May or something. We can't change that. So we'll be pre-recorded on the radio. We'll do live in the afternoon, but not on the radio.
Okay.
okay, so I'll be looking for the announcement, because it's not easy to follow, you know, all these changes. Yeah, when you mentioned about the superstition of the number 13, I remember at the condo that I was living before I moved to this senior apartment. That condo skipped number 13, and some of the residents didn't even realize. And so when they were giving out notice or something, there was a mistake because even the new management didn't realize the 13 was skipped. So when I was a kid, I already heard about the superstition of the number 13. And here it's the Bible that uses a lot of 13. So perhaps people use this number, you know, heard of this number from the Bible. And so anyway, last year, 2024, before the conference, then I realized the biblical timeline shirt, the T-shirt, that somebody made, and it was probably
excuse me, we don't want to get into that.
okay.
I know what you're going to say. We don't want to get into that.
Okay, so anyway, I realized the biblical timeline of history is very important. It's significant, very significant, and because it was this drafted by Brother Camping, the late Brother Camping, our common mentor, and because the Lord had him discovered the biblical calendar from Genesis and Matthew and so on, and the word Karasham that you just covered earlier. So I just realized then last year that there are two doctrines that separated eBibleFellowship from churches and other ministries because in the world, because they don't even believe in May 21, 2011, much less the date that will be coming. So it's up to the Lord if he wants us to know the second date, the end date of uh, spiritual judgment, on the world.
Right.
So,
I
yeah, that's what I
yeah.
realized, that these two doctrines, the other doctrine is the sacrifice, Christ's atonement at the
Hey, Louisa,
foundation
I don't mean to
of
interrupt. Do
the
you have a specific question
I think
about?
that's what she's saying. And if I may say what or to add to that, I think the churches, they've been relatively befuddled by all of this. Would you all agree, gentlemen, that the churches, they hear this information and they're just I would like to say almost like bewildered by it. And I think they would just stand afar off and say something like date setting and numerology. They'll have like a very uneducated approach to the way that Mr. Camping approached the Bible, which was comparing scripture with scripture. And when Mr. Camping was studying the timeline, I guess the churches were just going off in a completely different direction. And so what happened is the void just continued to separate to the point where they're standing afar off and looking at all the biblical information that we've obtained, and they just have a very general, well, I'm not going there kind of mentality because it's so far away from their understanding.
Well, when you look at the definition of numerology, I can see why they kind of just lump it all together because it's really just the significance of numbers, looking at the significance of numbers. But when the world or different groups look at numbers, a lot of times they look at them not the way the Bible looks at them. They like add up numbers. So the Bible gives us a very specific way to work with numbers. So if they want to lump it as numerology, they can, but it's not a good
Yeah,
label for us.
uh, I don't think it's because people have a definition in their mind. It's you're involved with numerology, and some people count letters, and assign numbers to letters, and that's all nonsense. And so you can get kind of thrown into the mix. And Yeah, it's just in the Bible. I don't think we mentioned this, but numbers are words. Numbers are words, and with the Bible, we're dealing with the Word of God. So um, sometimes, as soon as people hear numbers 13,000, and in our language, right, you can write out um, the number 13 and 1,000, and if you're writing a check or whatever, you write it out with words, and that's what we can understand. So we're not doing any kind of numerology. It's not algebra. It's not. We're dealing with words, and words have meaning. And in the Bible, for example, um, the Bible defines its own words, its own terms, and you can look at the number three, and you can see the biblical meaning, spiritual meaning is purpose. Four, like 4 points of a compass, is universality. Five is atonement. Six is work. God worked 6 days to create. Seventh day he rested. Number 6 has the spiritual significance of work. 10 is completeness. 12
7.
is fullness.
You skip 7.
Just to bother you. 12 is fullness. 13 is super fullness, or the end of the world. And so when we read Genesis 47, when Pharaoh asked him, why did Pharaoh ask him this? This is the Bible. You know, every word in the Bible is precious. It's so valuable. And this is something that we do with casual chatting, right? Pharaoh said to Jacob in Genesis 47, verse 8, Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how old art thou? How many times does somebody ask you how old you are? It's so common, but it gives Jacob the opportunity to say, Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been. And what's significant about that is 130, that there are words in the Bible that we have to look for. Is there any spiritual meaning to that? Well, Adam was 130 when Cain killed Abel. And then we read when Adam was 130, he had another son named Seth. And well, that's interesting. And then we find Jehoiada the priest was 130. And then after, upon his death, the child king that Jehoiada protected and saved, and he did good all of his days. Anyone know the name of that king? Was it Josiah? No, not Josiah, right? It was
I think it does start with the J, but I forget the name.
yeah,
Joash.
Joash did good all the days of Jehoiada. Well, once Jehoiada died at 130, he did evil and he killed the son, or probably a later descendant, like a grandson or so. But it says the son of Jehoiada, Zechariah, between the temple and the altar. So we find Cain kills Abel, related to 130 and a second son. That Jehoiada dies 130, a once good king now becomes an evil king, kills his son. And when we look at Jacob entering into Egypt, God ties it to the Great Tribulation. In Acts 7, it says in verse 11, now there came a dearth over all the land of Egypt and Canaan, and great affliction, and our fathers found no sustenance. But when Jacob heard there was corn in Egypt, he sent our fathers first, and then he eventually goes. And that's what the account is in Genesis 47. The great affliction is great tribulation. Megastalipsis in the Greek, same word from Matthew 24. There'll be great tribulation like there never was before. And that comes at the end of the world. Jesus in Matthew 24 is answering the disciples' question, what shall be the sign of your coming in the end of the world? Great tribulation will happen then. Well, God says this account, this historical parable, true history, teaching a spiritual meaning, which is teaching us about the spiritual famine that comes upon the churches at the time of the end. After 13,000 years of history, we can pinpoint the time of the Great Tribulation. And here God is having Pharaoh ask Jacob, how old are you? 130. 10 times 13, 10 completeness, 13 super fullness, end of the world. Complete end, the complete end. And we find that use of the number 13 throughout the Bible.
And that's interesting, Chris. Cain killed his brother in the end of the days when he was about to prepare that sacrifice. So God is giving us clues here and there, which is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have enough time to get into this. We only have a few more minutes, but one thing we didn't really talk about was we talked about the Kerosem, but as far as how do we know to place the patriarchs? So when one patriarch died, the next patriarch was born in that same year. And Mr. Camping, he had gone through the Exodus account with the 4 generations. So God told Abraham that they would come out of Egypt in the 4th generation. And here you have 4 patriarchs that lived during that period of time. And so he proved that those generations had to have been separated. So the year Levi died was the year Kohath was born. The year Kohath died was the year Amram was born. And then Aaron would follow that. And, if you actually, I looked very closely at it, if you try to shift them around to try to make them overlap with each other, you run into errors, right? So, like, even if you shift them by like 10 years and assume that, they did overlap, you would have like Levi being born 30 years later. And it would basically create this impossible situation where he would be younger than Joseph. In the Bible, lets us know Levi was older than Joseph. So, you have very little wiggle room to try to make the patriarchs overlap. You just can't, And
And
so basically it proves they had to have lived
right.
at separate generations.
And did Mr. Camping, based on that, come to the realization that in order for a patriarch to transfer from the one patriarch calendar standard bearer to the next, it has to be the birth year of the previous patriarch's death. The
Right,
death birth has to be the transition.
Yeah, because the Bible doesn't give us any other information on where we'd place it. So if it's not 70 years that we place Canaan, born to Enos, then where else do you place it? Age 80, age 90. And the only other place that the Bible gives us example is at the death year. So as soon as that patriarch died, the next one takes over. And basically the way to look at it is Enos begat an unknown son, which eventually begat Canaan. So we don't know who that son is. He was born at 70 and he begat Canaan eventually.
And when we do that, when we follow the genealogy, all the way from Adam, and we come down through history, when we get to Abraham, we have the same dates. Earlier I mentioned going from Solomon, you can work back to Abraham, and it's all from the Bible. Well, coming down the other way, you land on those exact same dates, which is confirmation. You're correct. You got it right. You have the right calendar, whereas Usher is off with Abraham's date. And so this is internal confirmation from the Bible itself, when you can find that structure, and it's so solid that you must have did it right. Because just think, we're saying there's 13,000 plus years from creation till now, and we have over 7,000 more years than Usher put forth. And so you if we're off, if it's wrong, you should be way off. You should be way off. If you're coming down through history down to Abraham, if you're wrong, you should have crazy dates. But it's right on the money.
Yeah, and there's quite a few historical dates that line up with the Bible, like the fall of Babylon, 539 BC, different kings like Jehu, and these are secularists who arrived at these dates, like Babylonian tablets to arrive at 539 BC. These are outside the Bible, and they're arriving at these same dates. I think with King Jehu, they found what's called the Black Obelisk, which is like an ancient relic that basically, in using like different solar eclipses that the Assyrians had kept track of, they backtracked to arrive at these dates. So they use sources outside the Bible, and the biblical timeline just so happens to line up with those dates. And the only way to get to those dates is to start with Adam. When you start with Adam and those long ages that people doubt they lived that long, that's what gets you to true historical secular dates, but also biblical dates.
And when we have that extra thousands of years, we have time for the Egyptian dynasties that archaeologists have found. Yeah, they go back over 3,000 years, which would disprove Usher's calendar. And this is a problem with the churches. they're continuing trying. They're not only disputing and correctly. Well, you say billions, but it's actually thousands. But then they're stuck in their debates and discussions about this, where the secularist is going to go to archaeology and say, look, you don't allow for this, you don't allow for that. But with a true biblical calendar, plenty of time for history to unfold, for all the time since writing developed. We allow the biblical calendar allows for all that.
And not to mention, one last thing is all the patterns we're finding in the Bible, like the 6,023, 5,023, 13,023. I don't know if you mentioned that one for May 21. Those couldn't have been arrived at if you used Usher's timeline. There's just no spiritual substance there. It's only when you have the correct dates, then you see how God used these numbers this
It's
way.
probably why people in churches and pastors, they don't talk about dates, because they don't trust them really, and they shouldn't. They're not sure of them. See, that's what sets this apart. Where the people of God, we speak with certainty. It's the authority. Christ, when you have the truth, Christ is the truth. He spoke with authority, and we speak with authority concerning, yes, here's a creation date, here's a flood date, here's when Christ was on the cross, and projected into the future. Biblical evidence is pointing to 2033, and so forth. We have these certain declarations, and this is the time of the church age. This is the time of the Great Tribulation. This is Judgment Day. That the churches, they don't know where they're at in time or history, because they have a faulty calendar. Well, one, a lot more beside that, but one of the reasons is a faulty calendar.
Right. And thank you, everyone. This effectively concludes our program, The Bible Exalted. Please join us again on Tuesdays, obviously with different times of broadcasting. But until next time, may God keep you according to his perfect will during this time of judgment. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for this segment of the Bible Exalted program, presented by eBibleFellowship, the electronic Bible fellowship. Visit our website at eBibleFellowship.org or our YouTube channel. You can also reach us by email at info@eBibleFellowship.org. And until our next Bible Exalted program, may the Lord's perfect will be done.